thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Very well, thank you, Maria. How are you?
I'm great. I love it. I mean, people who are listening to the podcast won't see this, but you've dressed up for me. You're in a wonderful suit. You look fantastic. I feel very underdressed. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. So I want to get started. I want to go to really the heart of understanding about your work. And you have a concept called the Centers of Power concept. How was that created and what is that about?
So when we first decided to launch this company or these ideas, we really wanted to base it on a fundamental understanding of how the world actually works, because a lot of analysts base their insights into themes, meaning what's happening today, and they're basing their analysis on ever-changing dynamics, which isn't something you should be doing as an investor or as a policymaker, because things change all the time, and if there's no underlining sort of paradigm that you work from, it makes it your investments are very susceptible to black swans and to great rhinos and to many things that you wouldn't have prepared for. So the centers of power concept allows one to really truly understand how the world works and the dynamics which occur in the world. And in the most basic way possible to explain it is that we take the nation state as the fundamental starting point of our conversation, meaning nothing is superior to the nation state in power. And if that's the case, we also assume that all nation states want power, and power is defined not as being the most, military strong, but power in the most simplest terms is defined as being able to fulfill your agenda as a nation state. If you can do that, then you are powerful, and you'll increase in power as you do this. But power is based on 6 fundamental concepts which make you powerful, which include things like a nation state's technological leadership, its active consumer market, its military strength, its geostrategic positioning, its availability of commodities, and other such dynamics. And once you analyze this, you're able to truly understand the opportunities and risks that a nation state faces. If you're an investor or if you're a policymaker yourself, you're better able to strengthen your country or see how your competitors are strengthening their country so you can compete in the global marketplace.
That sounds amazing. That sounds incredible information for somebody to have. And I believe you call it the Global Power Index. Is that right? Is something that's what you're creating? Tell us a bit more about that.
That's right. So what we've done is, from the basis, we've quantified these things, and we've created essentially 6 indices which are reflective of the 6 centers of power, and then we've put them all together in our own proprietary way to create a super index, which is the Global Power Index. Which, again, if you're an investor, it is sort of probably one of the best tools you can use to truly understand emerging markets, frontier markets, and also more established economies. And if you're a policymaker, you're again able to use this to better understand what investors would be looking for and how you can improve your own policies so that you are more stronger, so you can attract foreign direct investment, for example.
And is this available now? Has this been launched already?
So what we're doing is the 2022 version of the index will be launched on the 24th of February in collaboration with the London School of Economics. And if anyone would like to learn more about that or attend, then we have information on our site that you can probably point them to.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an incredible opportunity. Thank you for that. So you've talked about investors a little bit here as an introduction. Obviously, this is the area that you advise. What are the mistakes you see that investors and policymakers make that, if they put them right, could absolutely change everything, could be game changing?
I think in a large part, and this is from conversations with investors, a large part of it is that as the world changes, a lot more variables need to be considered. And for better or for worse, investors are short of time when it comes time to making decisions. Again, that if you're a trader, that's one thing. If you're an asset manager of a hedge fund or a family office, it's different. So not all investors are sort of built equally. But in general, what I've noticed is there's been a wide push to getting the fastest piece of information out and making decisions off the back of that. So that is reading newspaper headlines, and headline risks is becoming predominantly much more prevalent in the investing world. And they rely on headlines, and they rely on the general measured sentiment, which isn't mathematical or scientific in any way, shape, or form, but is what they see and what they read, and that will create the basis of their understanding of what to do next. And this, I think, is very detrimental, only because and again, I'm probably not doing myself a favor because I get quoted by journalists a lot and I'm on TV a lot. But when journalists write articles, they're not writing it for you specifically as an investor. They're writing it for the general investor for their benefit. But if you want more tailored insights, you need to go to the source of where the journalists go to get their information. So if they're quoting a report or a piece of analysis, then don't read the interpretation of the analysis through the lens of an article, but go straight to the work itself. To do that, that will already cut out a lot of the perception that journalists put in there, because again, they're vying for their own audience, which could be you, which probably is you, and they want to make sure they get enough eyeballs on the piece. So instead of doing that, go straight to the article which they're talking about, so you can have a much more holistic understanding. If you can do anything better, that's what I would suggest investors do, to really truly understand what exactly are the dynamics happening, as opposed to just picking out sections and then using that as fodder for your investment strategy.
That makes absolute sense to me because, of course, as you said, the journalists will be doing it through their lens. They have a different objective to you. So to go to the source, that makes really excellent sense. When you look at all this various information and what's going on in the world, you're looking 100 years ahead, aren't you? You've got a 100-year outlook. That seems a very long way ahead. I mean, a lot of us won't still be alive. Why is that important?
Well, naturally, we may not be, but the things that we put into the world will continue to happen. Meaning, if an investor these days, or even a policymaker, if your outlook is only every quarter or every election cycle, the issues that we're facing now, really as a human species, needs much more longer term consideration. So you can't really make investment decisions if you're only looking at the short term. And actually, there are individuals in the organization that can only really look at the short term because it's their job. But you should always have someone in the organization who's responsible for the long term trajectory outlook, and to get insights from different experts to feed their own decision making abilities so that they make decisions for the long term. Naturally, the 100 years is what we stretch them to think about, but naturally, you're going to have to think in the short to mid-term for day-to-day, execution. But you really need to have a longer-term outlook if you are going to be successful in this ever-changing and dynamic world that we're living in, where the rules that applied yesterday have changed, and you're not going to get the same results if you apply the same learnings yesterday to today and to tomorrow.
That's interesting because, of course, many governments are working on short cycles, aren't they? They're not thinking ahead. They're not planning ahead. They're working in these, to the next election, really, aren't they? And that's all they're planning to, which is obviously not what they should be doing.
Yeah, and it's worrying as well because if we're taking the nation state as the most essential element of human activity, then nation states set laws and policies. Wars happen between them. Taxes happen because of them. People are citizens of them. Trade happens between them. So if a nation state has a longer term outlook, then their policies can not only be reactionary, which is what a lot of them are doing, especially in crisis times like this of COVID, but if they have even if it's the next 10, 20 years, if you can project something worthwhile into your policy, which will benefit the people that you're serving for that long period of time, not only will you be doing good, but again, for those politicians who care about it, your legacy will also be imprinted as something worthwhile remembering, as opposed to being a reactionary prime minister or president, which only thought about the now and which sacrificed now for tomorrow.
Wow. Gosh. So here's a huge question, and I don't know if you can answer it now, if it requires a whole speech, really. But what are the things that you are seeing that will impact the world the most?
That is a big question, but we are prepared for that answer only because this is what we help our clients understand, even in the keynotes that I give and also in the consulting work that we do. And that's typically what we try to answer for anyone that comes through our doors virtually or through our physical doors. And from the basis of understanding a nation's sensitive power and the index which we've created, we have said that over the next 100 years, the 4 themes that will impact the world the most are the following. Globalization, number 1, becomes much more important. It becomes much more relevant to even the most forgetful sort of worker in the most sort of unattractive market. So, for example, even a farmer in, let's say, Afghanistan will be impacted by the tectonic plates of globalization. So that's one of them. geopolitics becomes ever more important, only because as nation states grow in their power, their ambition and their ability to execute on their agendas, as we mentioned before, grows. So their voice becomes a lot more greater because they have the financial capabilities to, because they have networks of different partners to stamp their authority in the best way they see possible. And we can see this throughout time through different nations doing this as their power grows. So geopolitics becomes ever more increasing in parts of the world where you never saw it before. Technological transformation or transformative technology, as innovation grows in not only the West and in Asia, but in other parts of the world, the ability to use this technology to change society for better or for worse sometimes will increase. So even if you're, I mentioned, a farmer in Afghanistan or a dentist in Germany, or you're a car salesman in London, technology will impact you in many different ways. And the last one, societal change. So that could mean demographic change, migration patterns. That could mean even the rise of ESG as an investing concept, and the rise of a more intelligent, I guess, consumer who pays more attention to the supply chains, to what they're consuming, which will change the supply chains as a result. These are things which governments and investors will need to really truly understand much more so than now. And these four things aren't happening separately. They're all converging together and happening at the same time, which is causing a very destabilizing effect on those investors who aren't considering these factors in their investing decisions. And that's what we try to do day in, day out as a firm, using our Global Power Index and other methodologies and other innovations we've created to help them on this process.
I can see that when they all come together, it becomes quite complex. So I can see why people need you to come in and help explain. So tell me, an organization wanted to bring an expert in to come and speak on the topics, on geopolitics, on what's going on. How do you differ from other speakers who speak on these topics? What is it? Why would they choose you? I mean, I'm really being really aggressive with my questions today here.
Yeah, no, you have to be. No, because the thing is, a lot of the thing is, and it annoys me a little bit, only because when we have the world as we see it, many professions you need expertise in it, right? So if you're speaking about the economy, an economist with years of experience is a natural person you turn to. If you're talking about medicine, you turn to a doctor, right? But when you turn to issues like geopolitics, typically the experience levels in things like this are people who may have worked in politics in the past, or people who have somehow taken an academic route to understanding these changes and challenges. But I don't think you can sell geopolitics as a service or as a speech really anymore, as just isolated on that. Because geopolitics, again, is impacted by the other three G4s, we call them, global four, the other three of them. And if you strictly say to yourself, I only speak on geopolitics, then what happens if technology comes into the fray, or globalization comes into the fray, or how technology will impact the decision-making processes of this government? If you are not keeping your finger on the pulse of these other developments at the same time, then your analysis is going to be very reductive. You're going to bring it back down to geopolitics, what you really understand, and you're missing out a whole universe of analysis and insights for your audience. And that's what we don't do. Because if you're speaking about you really need to understand, is it geopolitics you're talking about, or is it political risk you're talking about? These are things which sometimes are interchangeable, but they mean something truly to those who care about it. And if you say to yourself, I'm only a geopolitician, if that's even a word, or I speak on typically this topic, then everything else which is connected to that, you're going to cut off. Really? Is that the analysis you're going to bring to people? So I realized that early on from hearing, much more senior people than me speak, when geopolitics was the one thing to watch. But as the world becomes more complex, that concept cannot live by itself anymore. It needs to be connected to the wider changing dynamics of the world. And that's what I would bring to a talk when speaking. Not only talking about geopolitics, but including other aspects of the world which would matter so much to the audience. And we see great results when we do that.
Fantastic. It makes sense to me to have that whole, 360 view, if you like. You mentioned audience. Who would be your ideal audience? Who would benefit most from hearing your expertise?
Now, when I first started speaking, I would test my material on different audiences. So I would bring our topics to the military side of things, speaking at different military conferences, and they would love what I say for their own audience. I would bring then my talks to the chief investment officers of the world or in the investing world, and they'd find something of value in it. And then I would bring it to also the policymakers, so different international organizations and policymaking bodies, and they would find something value from it. So I think it really depends on what you want from the material that we deliver. But our audience are typically anyone who has a stake in the changes and challenges of this world, who really need to better understand it. And if you come to this from an investor point of view, then we have material. In fact, our event on the 24th of February is typically targeted towards investors and government officials and not the military. So if you're coming at from that point of view, then anyone from the HSBCs of the world to the family offices of the world to different kinds of hedge funds across the world, not only in emerged markets, in more developed, but also in emerging markets who more increasingly have a stake in what they do because they have more money at their disposal. Interest rates being so low and capital being so cheap, they are able to do a lot more with what they have. So they need better insights into how the world sees them and how they can impact the world. So that's a big audience. Policymakers. So again, as I mentioned, bodies like the IMF in the past, the World Bank, these kinds of organizations too would be sort of a demographic of ours. And the military side of things. But again, with military, it gets more complicated because again, you don't know a lot of what they're thinking about, and there's a lot of security clearances that you have to go through. But the most lowest hanging fruit would be in the investor community to begin with, and those who are connected to that as well.
And what specifically are they asking you to come and talk about? Are they asking you about what's going on now? Are they asking you for the 100 years? Are they? What are the topics they're asking for? Are they taking a specific topic and asking you to go deep on that?
Yeah. Well, typically when we do speak, there's certain hooks that they see me speak on, and they want to jump on those. So whether it's geopolitics, whether it's changing demographics, whether it's how globalization is impacting the world. But then once we have conversations before the talk on, hey, we actually have this concept of the COPs and the index, then the conversation grows and they say, let's talk about this, because they wouldn't really be aware of the angle that we're bringing. And probably that's due to our promotion, which is why we're having these events to, I guess, educate the market more on what we're doing. So it would be on different facets of the G4, the Global Four. And then once they're hooked in for these things, then again, every talk that I give, I insist on making it as bespoke as possible, only because the talk you give to the corporate insurance world is going to be different to the talks you give to the hedge fund world, and that's natural. So you can't use the same material, the same angle when talking to these audiences.
Wow. And I imagine also it's continually changing and evolving. So you're constantly having to update to keep up to date. And that's the value of having you coming in, that it's tailored to the audience, it's updated, it's up to the minute. Okay, I'm going to give you another difficult question. I've given you a hard time. I like you, but I'm making we work here. So final question here. What should we be keeping an eye out for in 2022?
2022, again, that's a big question. And I would push back and ask, it depends on who's asking the question. Because that's the X factor in giving proper analysis. Because if you to ask anyone, what are you expecting, if they give you one generic answer, they're not thinking about the audience as much as they should do. So if you're coming to me and you are a policymaker in a sub-Saharan African country who needs more foreign direct investment, for example, and you're seeing how COVID has really impacted your own domestic markets and also the sentiment of investing in emerging markets, my answer would be different. If you're asking me as a hedge fund manager or as chief investment officer in London who has exposure to the Chinese mining industry, then my answer would be different. But in general, I think what we're going to see now, especially with interest rates rising, we're going to see a lot of behavior that we saw last year, meaning investments coming from all angles into projects which really didn't have any longevity in them, investing in startups and investing in different kinds of industries and in different types of concepts which don't have a long-term ROI, being cut short very fast. That's going to impact, again, sentiment in the market, and it's also going to impact what the consumer has available to them. Meaning, if you're a startup and you're rolling out specific projects, and because interest rates are high, and because now your investors see, hold on, now that money is low, we need to cut off sort of dead weight or investments that aren't doing well. and you've promised your consumers certain things and you then can't deliver, that's going to impact not only the business, but also what you're training the consumer to think about business in the future. If all these startups start and they're offering all of these solutions and all of these different products and services, and then for whatever reason, they can't afford it anymore, it gets cut, you're really frustrating the consumer not to really buy into these things in the future. But again, the answer is very bespoke depending on who is asking. But in a general sense, again, given you're asking me from a chief investment officer point of view, for example, that's what I would say. So be very cautious in where you put your money in this year, because the markets are going to be very volatile, especially as things like crypto have different upswings and downswings. Confidence rises, confidence, dies down. These are things which need to be kept in mind by this specific audience. But then again, if you're a different audience, my answer would be different. And that's that bespoke nature, which I mentioned at the beginning.
Mind you, you've given a huge amount of value for those particular audiences that you've highlighted. Incredible value. I hope they're going to transcribe what you've said.
But you need to, but that's the thing where you need to do this, because you can't just approach the world now in a cookie cutter point of view. You can't say in general this is what's going to happen, because generalities are for the news media who can speak that way. If you're a consultant, if you're a keynote speaker, you can't say in general this is what's going to happen, because you don't speak to a general audience. You speak to a very specific audience, and they're bringing you in for a very specific issue. So if you say in general, guys, this is what I think will happen in general terms in these general years, then what value are you bringing? You're not really doing yourself a favor. So if you say, these are the insights I'll give you if you're facing these kinds of issues, but if you're facing these kinds of issues, this is what I would say to you. And that's that bespoke, X factor that I bring to a talk, and I will continue to bring, especially as 2022 rolls out.
That is excellent. I thank you so much. I've learned so much. And I also want to thank everybody for listening to the Speaker Show. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. You can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favorite podcast app. If you would like to invite Klisman to speak at your next conference, please contact Speakers Associates and plenty of time to book him, so you won't be disappointed. And also, we will add notes in this podcast so that if you want to join him on the 24th of February to grab that 2022 report and those insights, you can do so. So thank you all very much for listening. I will see you next week.